All right, everyone, we are going to get started. So once again, thank you for joining How to Track Cross-Channel ROI. My name is Blaze, and I will be your moderator today. Joining us is Jason Gillespie, the VP, Head of Analytics and Data Science at Criteo, and Darren Moore, the Product Marketing Measurement Lead at LiveRamp. Today we'll be talking a lot about how to attribute ROI across different channels. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the hashtag commerce marketing and feel free to tweet at Criteo and use the questions box to your right, and we'll be sure to get to those questions at the end of the presentation. So to start us off, Jason will be taking over, and then Darren will be talking through the methodologies on which to track cross-channel ROI, and then there will be an open discussion about what their favorite data tools are, and we'd love to have your input as well as the audience. So the three main items here will be Jason diving into the current landscape of how companies are trying to track cross-channel ROI and why it's so difficult and kind of frustrating. Darren will then take us through the methodologies, and then they'll both talk through the tools that are some of their favorites and some of the emerging tools to help solve these problems. And with that, Jason, I will give it over to you.
Well, Blaze, thank you. And attendees, thank you for your time today. We are going to talk about some of the results that we've seen in a Criteo shopper story where we've surveyed folks around the globe. We're going to talk about some of the approaches to making sure that you're correctly attributing the value of your marketing across all channels. And I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. We'll have some time for Q&A also. So let's talk through what's happening in the world of cross-channel ROI today. One of the things we know, both from our own experience, from what we're hearing from our retail partners, from what we're hearing in general surveys from people, including the Criteo shopper story, which was a global survey of over 9,000 participants, is that consumers are now buying when they want, where they want, on the device they want. What that means is, in order to understand this omni-shopping behavior, you really have to understand all the influences that come into impact a consumer's decision across all channels. You can see here on this slide a lot of data points. Sorry about that. But the interesting point here is that you've really got to be where the shopper is at each piece of the journey. That could be websites and apps, but it could also be people in real life. It could also be your retail stores. It could also be other advertising or social media. And I'll point out that each one of these slightly different colored bars indicates a different country. So while most of you on this call may be from the US or the European Union, I'll point out that these results are fairly consistent across all our major markets, from the US to the UK, FRDE, JP, even Brazil. So what it means is this is a universal effect as opposed to something that we're seeing in just one country. More channels, it's great on the one hand because it's more opportunities for reaching consumers. But if you think about social, web, mobile, desktop, and then traditional channels like in-store, display media, search, and email, you're starting to realize that every one of these channels may have a different level of trackability associated with it, and it may have a different system that's being used to track. What that means is a real challenge is data-driven. How do I connect all the dots? How do I combine data from all the different systems? I think that that's a challenge that we hear from marketers, and we're going to discuss what might be some solutions to that. So, in fact, one of the key results from a Kantar Millward Brown survey in 2017 was that 40% of marketers think that media investment should be allocated to cross-channel and cross-device. I think what they really mean by that is the measurement and the understanding associated with cross-channel and cross-device. Fundamentally, media is bought in channels. You don't really buy, for example, you buy social, you buy ads on Twitter, you buy retargeting from Criteo, etc. Those partners should execute across all devices and across all channels. And we think that that's what marketers really mean by this particular statement. Point being, marketers want to understand what's going on where the consumer is. And because the consumer is on all channels, on all devices, that's where marketers want to be also. We also found in another survey here from, this was actually from the Winterberry group, that measurement and processing were specifically called out by marketers as critical pieces of technology that are going to be important. And if you look at the 2016 versus 2017 results, you can see that cross-channel measurement and channel attribution increased from 41 to 49% of marketers specifically called this out. Almost half called this out and said, this is important to me as a marketer in 2017, and I would project if we did this again in 2018, it would only continue to rise. On the flip side, it is hard to be accurate in your cross-channel measurement and channel attribution if you don't have good data processing and you don't have good data hygiene. And you can see that that number has increased a full 14 percentage points from 20% of marketers to 34% of marketers. So we think the messages that we're getting from the market, whether that's what we're hearing in person, whether that's what we're hearing from Winterberry, whether that's what we're hearing from Kantar, Millward Brown, are all giving the same general message. Marketers want to understand the consumer across all devices, and marketers may need some help in doing that. So if you look at what marketers need to track today, you can think of it by marketing objectives. Am I trying to make people aware of my brand, make them aware of what I have to offer, basic top of the funnel awareness? Am I trying to move them from awareness into interest? Maybe I want page views on product pages. Maybe I want click-throughs. I want engagement on a website. I want engagement within an app. And then ultimately that interest should lead to conversion. I want to make a purchase or at least get some stuff in the cart. And then I want to re-engage. I want to maximize the lifetime value of that particular customer. Do that through retargeting. I do that through re-engaging across all channels. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Darren, who's going to talk about what are some of the specific methodologies that you could use in order to close the loop here between what the marketing is doing and the marketing spend.
Thanks, Jason. So yeah, if you start talking about the methodologies, if you don't measure, you can't understand. If you can't understand, you can't control. And if you can't control, you don't know how to improve your ROI, your marketing tactics, and the experience that your consumers are having with you and your brand. But not all measurement is created equal. This next section of today's webinar is going to talk about various attribution models. So I'm going to give a brief description of each one, some of the use cases for each, and then also talk about the pros and cons that exist. And some of the ones I'm going to be talking about are first click, last click, linear, time decay, and position-based. So we start with first click, first of all. So this is easy to measure, but can be somewhat oversimplified. It gives all the credit to the channel, publisher, creative, etc., in which the consumer was first exposed to an ad or a marketing message. And so it assumes that the initial exposure is wholly responsible for driving that conversion, and that gets the sole credit for setting a customer off on their path to purchase. Marketers who are solely focused on demand generation might find this model useful, as it highlights the campaigns that first introduce a customer to your brand, regardless of the outcome. First touch attribution is therefore more appropriate for companies that have short sales cycles or where generating brand awareness is most important. So it can help marketers decide where they should invest their top of funnel efforts. But you can't necessarily effectively optimize, because almost every customer makes that first touch, then has a series of further touch points before they get to the point of sale, and all of those other touch points do play a role, some more important than others. So first touch attribution can fail to give any of these any credit. I want to kind of talk about an analogy that might help you understand some of the differences between first click, last click, multi-touch, etc. If you think about giving your Oscar acceptance speech, if you only thanked your fourth grade teacher for casting you in your first role as cow number 3 in your school nativity play, what about all the subsequent family, agents, actors, directors, etc. that helped you get up on that stage 25 years later to accept your Oscar? I personally want to thank K.R. Darji, CEO of Buzzmosis, for that analogy, and I'll come back to it later in the talk. Moving on to last click, also pretty easy to measure and also somewhat oversimplified, because it gives all the credit to the last exposure prior to the transaction, the sale, the move into the shopping cart. And it's a holdover from the early days of search advertising. When advertisers only paid Google when someone clicked an ad, that click became all important and sales were therefore attributed to that last click. But if you're only running one or two campaigns, the simplicity of last click might be appealing. And this model can also be powerful for marketers who are solely focused on driving conversions. However, the last touch model does ignore other influencers on the path to conversion. A lead may interact with your company a dozen times or more before converting, and a last touch model provides little visibility into how these other interactions build ultimately towards that transaction. So you can't tell which channel, which touch point was actually best at generating revenue. Additionally, not all leads that reach the point of that last touch take the same path to get there. So there are lots of versions of the buyer's journey you're ignoring if you only look at the last step. Every path to purchase is different, and few people click on ads. But there are millions of touch points that people are using, millions of different ways to get to that conversion. That last click can offer an incomplete picture. So if I go back to my Oscar analogy, if you're accepting your Oscar and only thank your latest co-star, the director, your agent, your parents, and especially your fourth grade teacher are going to be pretty upset that you don't remember them. What we're seeing in today's world of digital commerce, though, is that the average transaction can have more than 30 touch points associated with it. That's a lot. And if you think about last click and first click, you're missing out a lot of that other piece of the puzzle. Linear attribution, therefore, gives equal credit to every touch point along the path to purchase. For example, if there are 3 touches, each receives a third of the credit. Using a simple example, if you're using Instagram, Facebook, and Google to promote your marketing messages to your customers, they all receive a third of the credit. If there are 10 touches, then each receives 10% of the credit. But if in reality there are 30 touches and each receives 3%, that doesn't really tell you very much. It washes out any discriminating analysis. It assigns the same amount of credit to low-value touches like email clicks as it does to high-value conversion activities. For example, in automotive marketing, if you're taking a test drive in a new car. Turning now to time decay. Time decay rewards the exposure event closest to conversion with the majority of the credit and the touch points prior with a diminishing amount. Again, using a simple 3-touch example of Instagram, Facebook, and Google, if Google was the last touch, they just receive pretty much 50% of the credit, Facebook about 30%, Instagram 14%. This model recognizes every interaction, but the touches closest to the conversion become more valuable as each increases the likelihood of a conversion. Marketers can therefore use this model to optimize for touches that drive conversion, giving more credit and more weight to the touches further down the funnel. But this model lacks the ability to recognize the interaction which originally introduced the customer to your brand. The linear model may also result in a low amount of credit for highly influential touches, like a visit to a store where you're browsing but not necessarily buying, if it happened too early in the customer journey. And finally, position-based will give 40% of the credit to both the first and last click touches, but the remaining 20% spread out across other clicks on the path. If what you value most is the touch point that introduced your customer to your brand and the final touch that resulted in a sale, this can allow you to optimize your first and last touch, but it can overinflate the relative value of those clicks relative to everywhere else, particularly if there's many touches in the chain. According to a recent Axiom Forrester study, and this backs up some of the data that Jason presented earlier, 44% of marketers surveyed consider attribution to be the most valuable use case when considering people-based measurement. Identity and people-based measurement move a client from cookie and device-based data to people-based, which allows clients to better understand how a consumer interacts with their various touchpoints and how their media works together across devices. Mapping the hundreds of digital identifiers floating around out in the wild back to an actual person. Tying data together at the individual level enables clients to gain insight into customer journeys that span multiple channels and devices over time. This provides a significant accuracy advantage over device-based measurement approaches and cookie-based measurement, where the relationship between devices, cookies, and individuals isn't necessarily clear and straightforward. With attribution, it's critical to know whether one person is seeing an ad 4 times across devices or 4 different people are seeing an ad only once. You also need to be able to recognize a customer or prospect in your CRM system when you encounter them in a digital channel. If you knew a cookie belonged to someone who was already a customer, would you treat them differently from a prospect or a lapsed customer to a loyal customer? So you need people-based marketing to prove the quantifiable impact of marketing on engagement, sales, and show ROI, and to fuel ongoing optimizations of channels, audience targeting, creative, and offers. When your customer journey spans more than one device or campaign, person-level multi-touch attribution looks at individual users' digital journeys and analyzes the path to conversion across, as its name suggests, multiple touchpoints. This allows it to measure the impact of each individual marketing tactic. An algorithm assigns a portion of credit for conversion to each touchpoint based on effectiveness. It can incorporate both offline and online channels, but you need a robust customer identity capability for it to be most accurate. So it looks at individual users' digital journeys to understand path to conversion and gives proportional credit to the channels driving highest ROI. So back to the Oscars. In your acceptance speech, you thank everyone, but what you say about them and how much you say about them is a true reflection of your journey up to that award stage, and that's where multi-touch attribution is similar. Multi-touch attribution, yes, it provides a micro-level view of channels and creatives. It's granular, it's typically fast, but it can ignore context, like external factors like economy, price, competition, weather, and can often ignore offline media. So you want to make sure that these are built into any model that you might do if you're taking this approach going forward. So back to that recent Axiom Forrester study. People-based marketing and measurement allow you to gain an omni-channel view of the customer. They allow you to increase sales revenue and improve the customer experience and to understand and optimize the customer journey. Most firms that were surveyed are midway on the path to an integrated people-based approach. If the goal for today's marketer is to achieve an integrated program that incorporates all or most customer touchpoints, only a few firms are there currently, around 17%. On the other hand, very few firms have solely channel-based programs where touchpoints are managed in entirely separate systems. So what we can see from this slide is that most firms are somewhere mid-journey, working on integrating and enhancing data, targeting and measurement capabilities to provide better marketing ROI across multiple touchpoints. And finally, for this section, what this slide shows us is that your customers are everywhere, and you need to be able to recognize them, message them, measure and optimize at every point of the customer journey in traditional digital channels like email, social, and search, as well as newer media like the Internet of Things and gaming consoles. Like Jason said, your consumers are on all these channels, so you need to be able to reach them, measure them, and target them effectively so that you're driving conversion where it matters most.
Thanks, Darren. That was a great overview. For those of you who haven't been through attribution that much, that was basically attribution 101 in a nutshell, hitting on all the commonly used methodologies, but I think really hammering the point home that if you don't see what's going on across all the devices at the people level, it's going to be a very different result if you look at just a cookie or just a device. So the question that we get asked a lot are, well, how do I do this? What are some of the tools that I could use? And let me just advance this here. Blaze, if you could go to the next slide. What are some of the tools you can use? One of the things that makes it a little difficult is that there's an extraordinary number of companies in this kind of catch-all ad tech, martech space. If you haven't seen this lovely Luma-esque Lumascape slide here, you can see just how complicated it is. Companies out there that specialize in the visualization of data, dashboards, linking people together through better identity solutions, providing extra data on marketing, doing email, doing mobile commerce. So where do you start? There's a couple ways you can approach it. I'm an analytics guy, so I gravitate towards one end of the spectrum, which is thinking about how do I get all this data? How do I put all this data together? How do I own and control my own database? So I would be looking for solutions on that end of the spectrum that might involve what a lot of people used to call a DMP, sort of data management platform, that are now often being called a CDP, customer data platform. But basically, it's just a database that holds all my users and all their marketing exposures. Where, if I were a retailer, where I would probably have a gap would be in my ability to connect together users across some of those systems. And that's where I would be looking for partners who had some sort of identity graph or some sort of solution that would help me say, yeah, you're right, Jason, person number 32 from system 1 is actually person number 906 from system 2. That's a very kind of roll it yourself, do it yourself solution. It's not for everyone. You would need to have a little bit of data science skills and technical skills in-house. I think there are other solutions that would be much more off the shelf, where you could leverage what some of these other companies in the space are doing. And I might actually turn it over to Darren to get his thoughts around what tools he thinks makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's very much kind of horses for courses. So one of the things that I talk about internally around measurement is really kind of establishing where you are on the measurement continuum and figuring out what's best for where you are in your own personal measurement journey within your organization. And I kind of think about measurement as a climbing up a mountain. The higher up the mountain you get, the more sophisticated the measurement becomes, the more costly it becomes. But the more insight you get and the more you're able to link that data together. So at the pinnacle of the mountain is that customer 360 omnichannel view. Things like data lakes that a lot of companies are investing in internally require a lot of data resources, require a lot of data scientists and a lot of money to set up. But it allows you to control that data in your own system and dig into it any which way to figure out your latest marketing problems. But it can go all the way down to the bottom of the mountain, where you're just really looking at kind of the basic KPIs around reach, frequency, viewability, all those types of things, and then figuring out how a single channel is building towards conversion, and then building out to closing the loop like Facebook conversion API, double-click conversion API, to see how your online marketing activity is driving your offline conversions. So it kind of spans the gamut from very low level, kind of low cost of entry, very focused on specific problems you're trying to address, all the way up to that data lake where you're able to kind of really swim around in your own data, bring it all together through an identity resolution to link all those different disparate data sets together, truly answer the latest and greatest marketing problems that you're facing.
Darren, I think I'm going to give you the award for best metaphors. First, you brought the Academy Awards into it, and now we're climbing mountains. But your point is very well taken. From the summit of a mountain, you do get the 360-degree view, but boy, it's hard to get there. That shouldn't discourage people from starting to take that first step. Would you agree? Do you think it's hard for people to just even start their way up, or where do you think they start to get bogged down in that journey?
Where we see kind of the point of entry that we're talking to most of our clients around is around that closing the loop with offline to online or online to offline. We're helping them figure that out, helping them draw the inferences and see kind of how their many online touch points are helping drive conversion. But we're doing that through kind of single channels to begin with. And like I say, it is very much about taking that first step and looking at a single channel like Facebook, like DoubleClick, where you're spending a lot of your digital dollars. You really want to understand how that is driving offline conversion. That's a great place to start. And then you build from there. You add more channels, you add more platforms, you add more data sources to really kind of start to build out that picture.
Gotcha.
And then you move
so
on to
most people have started, they've gone some of the way, and then one key piece that's missing is the linking of, for example, in-store or offline data. There may be other hurdles, and that's where maybe they need some outside assistance or another piece of technology to advance from there.
Sure, yeah.
There's a whole set of solutions out there. What is Criteo doing, for example, to try to take advantage of people-based thinking, restructuring your marketing around the shopper, around the person? Our approach has been to try to leverage everything that we see within e-commerce, which is somewhere around 3.7 billion devices, which equates to about 1.2 billion humans or people. Obviously, there's about a 3-to-1 ratio there of device IDs to people. And we capture that data through our clients, so it's a direct relationship when people are browsing and transacting across the network of people that operate Criteo. It actually adds up to about $615 billion in annual e-commerce sales, so it's a pretty good chunk that helps with measurement, that helps understanding what the marketing is doing. About 30 billion of that is post-click, so when you're thinking about attribution and you're looking at all the clicks that occur before e-commerce sales, it's nice to have that sort of benchmark there. And in terms of interest, 3 pieces here, and I sort of started with identity, talking about how many devices and people there are. I should have moved to interest because really that comes next, which is looking at how many products people look at. We're looking at a class of about 4 billion products, about 21 billion interactions on those products every month. So you can see that from our end, what we're trying to do is aggregate data across the world of e-commerce and then make it available on an open basis. The reason we want to do that is because we think that the banding together of retailers is one way to obtain some of the scale that you're seeing out there among major players. So on the one hand, you have Amazon, who has gigantic scale, though even their scale is not as big as $615 billion. I think they're around $400 billion. On the other side, on the marketing side, you've got the walled gardens like Google and Facebook that have great scale, but they're not always the most forthcoming in terms of sharing data, and so it can be difficult to attribute the results of marketing on those walled gardens because you sort of have to take their word for it. So our approach is, let's build an open data set that has the scale, but that lets you kind of independently verify that your marketing is doing what you think it's doing and what you hope it's doing. And I'm just trying to, again, advance to the next slide here. If you could do that, Blaze, I'd appreciate that. So the other thing that we do is we're a machine learning company. And so we are trying to optimize to drive what clients want. Most clients, they want to sell stuff. Some clients want engagement. Maybe you're doing an awareness campaign, in which case the transaction isn't as important as the engagement on the site. So you might be more interested in driving a high click-through rate or redefining conversion. Most retail clients are looking at order value or margin. We do that by optimizing on 3 dimensions. The bid. Bidding is kind of that hand-to-hand combat where you're actually interfacing between the user and the inventory, whether that's a direct sale on a key publisher, whether that's through an exchange, whether that's through a custom integration such as Facebook DPA, whether that's through owned and operated inventory, native. It's just all that hand-to-hand combat around what's the exact right amount of money to bid on an eCPM basis for a given user. Second thing, of course, we do is personalize the recommendation. If you've seen our banners, they do include products by and large, and we want to make those products not just what you looked at. We want it to be a deep statistical analysis at the user level so that each user is seeing things. And the example I'll give to tie this back to cross-device and why operating on a person basis is so critical with marketing. Imagine that a user comes to your website on their desktop device. They look at 6 products, and then they purchase product 5. You then see that user an hour later on a mobile device. Well, if you're not aware of the transaction that occurred, you might run the risk of retargeting that user with products that they've already purchased, which obviously isn't very effective. And then you're also losing the opportunity to show them recommended upsells and cross-sells. So that's the difference in how marketing itself changes, how a banner itself changes when you know someone across 2 devices versus when those 2 devices are disconnected. And then kinetic design is the philosophy that a banner shouldn't be static. A banner should be made of constituent elements, and those constituent elements should be continuously tested and refined over time across all devices. Maybe the call to action should be tested. Maybe the color set in use should be tested. Maybe showing 2 versus 4 products in the banner should be tested. So we're a test and learn philosophy, and we want to do that at the user level. Next slide, please, Blaze. Finally, if you wrap all this together in the consumer decision journey, you can think about, well, you're going to need to acquire new customers. You're going to need to understand the attribution of people who bought things both on and offline. You're going to need to retarget customers as they come to your site. And eventually, you're going to need to match all those customers together through your CRM data for what's going on in your store with what's going on your site. Again, that's our approach. We sort of have these different products such as consumer acquisition and retargeting that we link together at the user level in order to tie it all together. Lookalikes is a derivative product that you can use in order to find more people who look like those who come to your site. They look like people who would want to buy from you, but maybe they haven't had a chance to been to your site yet. So again, our approach is let's take big data, let's form a network, let's pull everything together, and let's develop products that allow you to hit the consumer where they are in the journey as they go through that journey. Next slide, please.
And that would be me. Well, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Darren. That was really, really good, and I think we all learned a lot about attribution and cross-channel ROI. You know, I think just listening to all this made me wonder, you know, what do you guys use as your favorite data tools? If you're on a desert island, you have one data tool left that you can use. Darren, what do you think?
Again, I think it goes back to kind of what the objective is you're trying to achieve. I think that pinnacle is that data lake, and we're seeing more and more of our clients starting to really use that, take control of their own data, take control of their kind of data destiny. And I'm really excited about kind of where that space is going. But I think it does require a big tech stack, a big kind of organizational shift to make it work, and be able to kind of pull all that data together and get the most out of it. And although it's like a data lake where it's like you're pulling all that data into a repository for you to interrogate as questions come up, I think you still should have some idea of the scope and what you might want to get out of the data lake before you start building it. And that you build it with kind of identity at its heart so that you're able to kind of link all that data together, and really understand the customer A in one of your CRMs is the same person who calls your call center, is the same person who responded with a coupon from your direct mailing.
Right. Jason, what do you think?
So I would agree with everything Darren said, and I think that applies to most large e-tail companies. And first of all, I'm really glad you put me on a desert island with internet, and I hope it has Netflix too. But I think I'm going to give a slightly different answer for imagine I'm a very small e-tail company, and maybe I'm just dipping my toe in this or getting started, and I need something that's a little more prepackaged and out of the box. I think you really need to investigate what is the best way to use a web analytics platform, whether that's GA, Google Analytics Premium or 360, whether that's Omniture, whether that's Adobe, which is Adobe Analytics, whether it's Core Metrics. How do I take my web analytics system and get more out of it? Maybe that means I need to find the right interface with some sort of identity platform so that I can teach my web analytics system that I already have using how to understand people-based measurements instead of just cookie-based or device-based. So I think I would invest some time and energy in basically making web analytics great again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because especially if you're getting started on an online presence and your online ad spend, it's not always going to be dollars, right? And I think, you know, Jason, I'd be curious about your opinion on this too. What is a metric for a smaller company? You know, they've got some pieces hooked up here. They're trying to attribute success to their online marketing efforts. What else should they be paying attention to other than just revenue?
Yeah, great question. I think they need a better understanding of what goes on pre-revenue. And so revenue is fairly easy to track because it's one of the few things that requires very strong identity information in order to create revenue. It's very hard to check out without giving an email address, a credit card number, your name, your address. So there's very good identity associated with revenue. I think where they should invest is probably thinking about what else is going on pre-revenue that may have affected that revenue, whether that's site visits, which is kind of low-hanging fruit because it's first-party data, or whether that's marketing exposures, and how do I connect pre-revenue activity to revenue activity.
Darren, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would just maybe talk a little bit about the offline space and what they can learn there. So location-based data, when you're not actually driving a sale, but you're driving visitation, which can be an indicator of a future sale, might be something interesting to know. And then maybe kind of share of wallet as well. So understanding what if you can get an insight into where your customers are spending among your competitors, and how you can start to gain more of that share of that consideration and spend.
Right. Great. And we have just time for one more question. Before we do that, to all the attendees, you can find the copy of this deck in your handout section on the webinar panel, so you should be able to just click that and download it. We'll also be sending out the recording later on. If you'd like to download another ebook about measurement that goes into LiveRamp's model of people-based measurement, just type in bit.ly/LR measure, and that should bring you right to that ebook. And the final question really is about that online to offline. So if someone walks into a store, how do you get that data, right? So what's the best method to say, okay, this person bought at the store at the counter, but then how do you follow up online? Darren, what do you think on that?
Yeah, it really is around kind of matching up your CRM database to that online exposure and online experience. And you may have multiple CRM systems, like you may have like call center, you may have, and then your kind of in-store transaction database on loyalty programs, etc. So you need to be able to link all of them together and identify people across those disparate data sets and your disparate databases, and then be able to link that ideally through an identity resolution service like LiveRamp to be able to kind of link that and match that up to the online exposures, the online behaviors, and the website visitation that you have.
Right. We actually got an interesting question kind of related to that. So, if mobile is a device where advertising is cheaper in general, but a company has a higher conversion rate on desktop, how do you really follow from mobile to desktop, and how do you sync up that mobile journey too? Because that could also be happening in store. It could be someone's researching on their phone and then going to desktop. Is there a way to do that that's straightforward, simple?
I don't know about straightforward and simple. Yeah. It probably gets back to that kind of multi-touch attribution again, and I think that's what happens in the real world. Like 90% of sales still happen in brick and mortar locations, but even in the online space, I think a lot of search is done in the moment on a mobile device. But when it comes to that final transaction, you do want to just kind of have that extra touch on desktop. I know that happens in a lot of different industries. So yeah, I think identity resolution plays a part in kind of linking all that together. Multi-touch attribution, especially when it's people-based attribution, will allow you to kind of see that journey and how many times somebody is using a mobile device and what they're doing on that mobile device that might lead to the conversion. So are they relying on social? Are they relying on search, video information about your product prior to that final transaction?
Right. Jason, any thoughts on that, on tracking mobile conversion that actually happened on a desktop when it came to conversion, but really started with a mobile ad?
Yeah, actually, a little more about a little thought on the value of mobile in general. So there's a theory out there that, yes, mobile appears to be a little cheaper, and the reason it appears to be a little cheaper is that what I'll call the apparent conversion rate is lower, meaning when you click or are shown an ad on a mobile device, the conversion rate that follows that action in, say, the next day or 7 days or 30 days is lower than the equivalent marketing exposure on desktop. But that may very well be because we are under-tracking it, because we can't see all the people who are exposed on mobile and then buy on desktop, or vice versa, really, but the effect seems to be stronger mobile to desktop, which means it's entirely possible that mobile is undervalued. So we should always consider, when we're talking about conversion rate, how is it defined when we're thinking about valuation and how much inventory is really worth?
Right, that's a great point. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Jason, so much for sharing your knowledge with us, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great
Sure
afternoon.
thing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Blake.